All right, so now I'm going to make some videos for section 1.3. I'm going to break this section into some pieces so that the videos don't get too long. All right. The reason this section is here is when people do a formal, tell you what the formal rules are for adding and subtracting signed numbers, a lot of times they use absolute value when they state them. I personally don't use the formal statement of the rules, so it's not going to be that important for what I'm trying to do, but you will see absolute value notation. You need to be familiar with it. And then the idea of an additive inverse often gets mixed up with absolute value. And so we want to make sure you know the difference there. Okay. All right. So an additive inverse is actually just a formal word for an opposite. So additive inverses are really opposites. Okay. The additive inverse is really the opposite of a number. I'll just leave the S off. All right. And then absolute value is actually what it means. Let me see where that good part of the pin is. There you go. The absolute value really is just distance from 0 on a number line. Okay. All right. So we're going to we'll work 43, 45, and then I'll do 48 and 50 of these examples. All right. And we'll do two parts. We'll do the additive inverse. That'll be the first thing I do. And then we'll do the absolute value. And I'll do that on all of these. Additive inverse and then absolute value. Okay. Actually, let me do 47 and 49. And that way I can use those same headings. All right. So when you're doing the additive inverse, that's taking the opposite. So that's the opposite of -7. So it's really like if you wrote it using symbols, it would be this. That would be doing the opposite of -7. So that would turn out to be +7 when you're finished. Then if you're doing absolute value of -7, that's when you use those horizontal bars like that. Make them longer than the number so they don't look like ones. And the absolute value of a number is how far away from 0 it is. So see, -7 is over here, and it's 7 units away from 0. And then the opposite of -7 would be 7. It's like, what would be the number on the opposite side of 0? So with this one, both the additive inverse and the absolute value just turned out to be +7, just 7 on both of those. Okay. All right, when you look at number 45, the number starts off as positive. So the additive inverse would be the opposite of 8, which would be -8. It would be the opposite of 8, which would be -8. And the absolute value would be the absolute value of 8. That's distance from 0, and that would also be 8. So on that one, the additive inverse, the opposite of 8 would be -8. And then the absolute value of 8 would be 8. Okay. All right, on 47, the opposite of -3/4 would be +3/4. Okay, and the absolute value of a -3/4 would be +3/4. And then with 5.6, the opposite of 5.6 would be -5.6. The absolute value of 5.6 would stay +5.6. So do you see how the additive inverse and the absolute value are not the same thing? Okay. So that was the point of the first set of problems, was just making sure you saw the difference in those two ideas. Okay. All right, now this middle chunk of problems in here is really getting at the fact that absolute value is actually a grouping symbol. And you have to pay attention to that grouping symbol. You have to do what's inside the absolute value first. So it's kind of like parentheses, it just has a little more to it than that. All right, so we ought to be able to just come in here and do these odd problems. That should be sufficient. Okay, so if we want the absolute value of -6, the answer would be 6, because it's 6 units from 0. The difference between 51 and 53 is that the negative sign on 53 is out in front. You see that? So you start with the 12, you do the absolute value of 12, which would be 12. Then you take the opposite of that. So this would turn out to be negative 12 when you're finished. Okay. Now 55 can get mixed up. Some of you already know or have seen things like this where there's like 5 minus a negative 3. And you might be thinking, okay, there's 2 negatives, so that's going to make a positive, right? Well, parentheses are not exactly the same as absolute value. Parentheses don't really have an innate operation there where absolute value does. So just work out 55 using order of operations. So you start at negative 2/3. Then this part, when you do this part, the absolute value of negative 2/3 would be 2/3, but then you have the negative out in front, so you're going to bring that over. You need to do the opposite of 2/3, and that would be just that negative 2/3. And that would be your final answer. Okay. Now 57 and 59 are basically the same, except for you have that added little negative out in front on 59. So watch what happens. Absolute value is a grouping symbol. Really emphasize these so you don't see them as ones. They're make them a little longer than the number. So you start and you do what's inside and get 3. Then you do the absolute value of that, and that would be 3, positive 3, and that would be your answer. Okay, when you follow order of operations on 59, you would say 6 minus 3 is 3. I need the absolute value of that, and then I'll take the opposite. So the absolute value of 3 would be 3, and then the opposite of 3 would be negative 3. And there you would have it. Okay. All right. Now, the next chunk of problems is trying to help you think about how to determine which number is the lesser of 2 numbers, which one is smaller. And I think that would go well with putting the numbers on the number line, which you see right after that. So we'll do several of these. All right, so it's kind of important that you realize that this is a number line. It's a real number line, okay? And I'm going to put a 0 in here. When you go this way, the numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger. Keep going like that, okay? And they would keep going, and the arrow means keep going towards what we would call infinity, okay? And the more you go to the right, the bigger the number is. This is the direction where the greater numbers are. And if you continue past 0 to the left, that'll get you to -1, -2, -3, and so on. Okay? All right, so when you go that way, the further to the left you are, the lesser the number is. It gets tricky when you get over to the negative side. Like what you first might want to say is the smaller number would be wrong. Okay? When you're looking at 61, a lot of times people make the mistake and they choose -3 as the lesser of the 2 numbers because 3 is smaller than 11. But you see how -11 would be further to the left if you thought about it? Here would be -3, -11 would be way out there. So it would be more negative. So it would be the lesser of the 2. Let's circle the lesser of the 2. Okay. All right, we'll do a lot of these because these are hard. When you look at 62 and you have 2 negatives, -8 you would hit first and you'd go past that to -13. So -13 is the lesser of the 2 numbers. Now, if you want to make this more interactive, just pause the video and try to do all of the problems from 61 to 72 and then play it and see if you made the right selection. Okay. With 63, -7 would be further to the left. 64, 17 has a bigger number part, so it would be more to the left. All right. Now it gets a little interesting because some of them have absolute value symbols on them. So you're really trying to compare 4 with the absolute value of -5. So you'd actually want to work that out, and that would be 5 units from 0. So that would be 5. So you're really just comparing 4 and 5. So 4 is the lesser number. Let me not circle that right there. So 4 is the lesser number. Okay. All right, and same idea here. Absolute value of -3 is really 3. So the lesser of the two would actually be the absolute value of -3. It would be more to the left. All right, you got absolute value on both of the numbers in 67, so that would be positive 3.5. This would be positive 4.5. So the 3.5 would have been more to the left. Here, these would both turn into positive 8.9, positive 9.8. 8.9 is smaller than 9.8. With 69, you got, don't forget, these are not ones, these are absolute value. You've got some order of operations to do. You do the absolute value of -6, which is 6, and then bring down the negative. Absolute value of -4 is 4, and then bring down the negative. So -6, this guy, would turn out to be more to the left. Okay, so here we have another one. So this would be -2. This would be -3. And -3 would be more to the left, so you would circle that one. And then on 71 and 72, you just work out that part inside, which is 2. Absolute value of that would be 2. Inside, you'd have 4. You have to take the absolute value, so you'd get 4. So 2 is smaller, so that's this first one. Okay. 7 minus 2, 8 minus 1, both are positive. So when you do the absolute value, they're just going to be a 5 and a 7. So this would be the smaller one. Okay. All right, I think I'll stop there and save this number line for the next video. Okay, so this video pretty much just looked at what absolute value was, reminded you that absolute value is a grouping symbol, and also helped you to see that you got to worry about the difference between additive inverses and absolute value. Okay. All right. So let me stop this and get it posted.